Let's talk about grades.
Mm,
What do you think the purpose of grades is, and why don't you guys use them? What do you do instead?
yeah. Why don't we use grades? I would say because learning is not a competition. It's a lifelong journey, and grades tend to shrink that journey down to numbers and comparisons. We focus on growth, reflection, and mastery, not just performance, and connection for why I'm learning this. If I don't care about the subject and I'm just doing it for the grade, well, that's not going to stick with me. And I'm not going to carry that beyond my life outside of schoolwork. So that's not really setting our children up for success in their lives or for that self-actualization, to really care about what they're working on, what they're creating, and to have the inner motivation to keep developing in that way.
You are listening to Dedicated Joe, the new dad's guide on the upending and transformational experience of becoming a father.
We are dedicated.
So school really messed me up. As a free-thinking, creative, autistic kid, I just could not fit in the box that schools try to put all the kids into. And the harder they tried to hammer me into it, the more it just left me broken and bruised. So I've been healing from those wounds forever. It set me on a mission to change the way we treat kids, from parenting to schools. I've started youth programs in schools and eventually Serenity Kids. And when came time for my daughter to go to school, I tried to start a school for her, and it was very, very hard. It's a very hard business model. So I was so fortunate to find the Whole Life Learning Center, founded by an old friend, Michael Carberry. I had him on the show last week to talk about how you go about picking a school. And today we really go deeper on what's wrong with the structure of most schools. And this isn't just public schools. This is private schools that tend to be structured to create compliance over curiosity. And then we also talk about what a holistic education can really look like they do at Whole Life Learning Center. We get into what learning looks like without punishment or grades, right? We talk about the difference between a healthy challenge and a kind of rigor that can create stress or shame. We dig into what the best way is to teach reading, and what's the best way to teach math, and how do you match these to developmental stages to really create a lifelong love of learning. We talk about freedom versus chaos. Not anything goes, but real freedom, the kind that gives children emotional safety to take risks, struggle, try again, and how to create teachers that are more like mentors that are there to support them. So Michael has just spent years building this model that is really honors a child's nervous system, respects their individuality, and still invites them to grow to their edge. So as a parent, this is exactly what I wanted for my daughter. And if you're thinking about what kind of school for your kid, or interested in what true holistic education looks like, this chapter's for you. Let's check it out. You probably haven't been in the classroom as a teacher in a long, long time. So it also seems like teaching the teachers to be mentors of their students, or allowing them to be, also is the way their bosses show up, that you're mentoring them. You're not trying to control them. You're not holding them to a uniform standard. They're not part of that system that traditional education, it's, everybody's controlling everybody, from the state legislatures to the administrators to the teachers to the students bullying each other, controlling each other. And there's this system of control that you seem to have broken out of.
Yeah, there's a lot of oppression in that system. And yeah, I get to be the mentor for the mentors now. And, and every once in a while I'll kind of slide in there, and I love getting to connect with the kids. And like that young learner I mentioned before, you get to help them maybe work through a challenge. But our mentors as well, through the training and professional development that we do our vision boards and our heart maps. We create our own learning plans, and support each other with accountability around those things. So that's really important as well. It's we have a plan, and we have, just like when I have, as an educator, I have a lesson plan. I want to have a plan and also have the freedom to throw it out the window when what's really alive in the group right now is something else. And I think that's huge. And I love that feedback that Della gave you, that, well, my mentor really knows how to be with me when I'm having big feelings. Because in that larger traditional system of implied oppression, there's not time for that. When you have one teacher in a group of, 20 to 30 students, I don't have time to address that this child is upset right now. I need to move on with the lesson because I need to get through this lesson for my performance review. We need to cover this stuff, and because it's going to be on the test. Where at the Whole Life Learning Center, or at a model that is truly relationship based, I can lean in and take the time. And we've got the ratios to say, hey, will you be with the group? I'm going to go check in with my friend over here. And I find out that, oh, maybe this child lost their cat over the weekend. Well, guess what? She's not going to be in a place to learn. She needs to be held in that grief, and she needs to learn that that's important to be honored and to be felt and to understand. And maybe then there can be an opportunity for some kind of small ceremony that we could have up in the gardens, and and write messages to the cat, or work out something with the parents, and other kids could be witness to that, and that helps them with their own grief. And so those kinds of things can open doors to all sorts of learning, that it might not have been on the planned path, but because we as educators have that ability to pivot, it can bring so much richness and support. And again, that is foundational to that academic and intellectual growth, because I'm not going to be, my brain is not, the human brain will not be primed to take in and integrate new information. And this is just neuroscience. If it is in a place of grief, if it's in a place of stress, it's not primed to learn. So there's no point in giving a lesson.
The nervous system is always learning, though. So the nervous system is in a great place to be wired to accept grief, to embrace emotion. You even said like encourage other kids to be in that with them, to create a ritual or ceremony. And otherwise my nervous system learned to shut it down, to be unsafe with those feelings, because I was forced to try to get back to my brain to learn facts. And so, when we talk about holistic, it's like she wasn't in a place to learn facts for their brain, but she was very much in a place to learn experientially how to grieve, and how powerful is that? Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. That's going, into the feelings, into the nervous system, to really somatically feel that, to help move that through, so that then the brain can be primed to learn new things. But you're absolutely right that, and that's going back to that social emotional learning. Like, I can understand this myriad of feelings that move through me as a human being. And also I can learn some things to help regulate those, to understand them, to regulate them, and to be able to move through them.
Yeah. So essentially you want a place where the teachers are also becoming self-actualized, that the adults in that model, if the kids are the goal of self-actualization, they need to be ready. And not just the teachers, but the administrators and anybody around is modeling self-actualization. And it's sort of the natural human state to want to pursue more, to be more. And for thousands of years, this is how kids learned. They didn't go to school. They were in the tribe, learning from other adults how to do things, learning
from other kids of all ages, right? Not just batched with all the other kids born in the same year.
Learning by doing. I think there's a lot of brain science that says you don't really learn by listening and memorizing. It just goes in one ear out the other. But you do it, you somatically experience it. You learn how to bake a cake by baking a cake. Like, you can read a book on it and then, oh, I know how to do it. But if you haven't done it, you probably need to do it a few times.
Probably won't taste too good the first time, right?
Yeah. So learning by doing. So, okay. So your third pillar.
Yes. So third pillar of holistic education is project-based learning. So that means just what you said, a perfect lead in, that we need to do, right? We can't just talk about it and put it up on the whiteboard. To really have an understanding of the kind of real world education that we're supporting. So what does this mean? This can look like a place-based education, where we're really getting in touch with our local ecosystem, and we're learning about the local flora and fauna, and learning about the local history. So many ways to do that by getting out into the community, getting involved. There's nature-based education, same thing, right? Getting our hands in the dirt. We're planting gardens. There's so many amazing things and projects that whole life learners have done. They have planted literally hundreds of trees with an organization called Tree Folks here in Austin. In fact, our middle school is teaming up with Tree Folks in the coming semester, in this semester, to plant dozens more trees in a food forest in the heart of downtown Austin, planting more fruit trees and many other plants there that we get to go and contribute to that amazing project. We've done local creek cleanups, but also projects. I can remember years ago, a group of our older kids wanted a better fort. We had kind of like a little playscape fort that they could hang out in, but I said, Mr. Michael, we want like a big fort. And I said, okay, well, so show me your designs. I want you to, do some designs. I do not want to have to pull a permit for it. So it has to be this many square feet and this height. These are some limitations and constraints for you. But I want you to use, graph paper and show me these, different designs that you have and how it'll work. So they did that and went through some iterations, and then I said, okay, this is the budget that we can have for that. And it was enough budget to get some good bones for the structure so that it would stay standing, that it's still standing a decade later. But there wasn't enough in that budget for their walls or for their roof. And so they got onto Craigslist and found fence pickets for free. They found corrugated aluminum roofing and were able to go and pick that up for free and get some donations. We got some parent volunteer time, and pretty soon they have this epic raised fort with climbing walls and slides coming out of it, and they made that happen. They got to build. They worked on it every Friday for months, and over the course of that semester, got to see from an idea to a proposal on graph paper to a fort that they could hang out in and play all their imaginative games and run around, be up in it. And now some of those kids come back as graduates and they're like, well, look at that. The fort's still standing. And my son's class, actually, one of their projects last semester was to kind of upgrade that same fort. So they were out there choosing paint colors and helping to nail boards back in. And, so like the project lives on. So those are just a few examples of project-based learning that has come to life, and that we're bringing in the math, we're bringing in the critical thinking skills, collaboration, bringing in creative writing. All of those things can come through so many projects. It makes it relative. It brings the learning to life. And also things like simple things. It could be like a campus cleanup. It could be planting a garden, preparing a booth for our upcoming Fall Fest. This is project-based learning, and the kids are, out there managing it and counting tickets and making change and things like that. So that's an example of the project-based learning that is woven into our curriculum, right? We have the academic subjects, but that project-based learning is a place to bring all of those academics together. And studies show that through project-based learning, there's better retention. And so that learning really sticks with the learners, and they're able to take that and apply it, to their lives and other things that they're creating.
Yeah, it's certainly more fun, especially when it's their idea like that. There's a lot of talk about motivation, how you motivate
Yeah.
kids. And so much of the school system is designed to figure out how to get the kids to comply, to do what we want, to motivate them. And so here is this example of where you're not trying to force them to learn or trick them into learn or bribing them into learning. You're just saying, you want to do a cool thing, here's the steps to do it. And they learn so much from it. And that treehouse is awesome. We'll throw a picture up of it for the video here for people to see it, because
Oh, nice,
it's a
nice.
really cool space. You can tell it's like alive from them,
Absolutely. Yes. And so curiosity is the driver and community is the classroom. And it comes back to, we're not waiting for, these kids aren't waiting to grow up to be in the real world. They are living it right now, creating,
Mhm.
starting their businesses, working on their performances, forming a band and really creating and contributing in their community right now.
And for the economy, that's how it would be like at our business or any job I've ever had. If I have to learn a skill to do a project, it's for the end result of the project. It's not just to learn it for the sake of knowing it and memorizing it. So that's why I
Right.
think some schools disconnect the product of learning from the process, and you need to learn just for the sake of learning. And it's very hard to motivate somebody to do that, because mostly we learn because we want to create or do something, and kids are very natural like that. They're happy to
Yeah,
learn it if it means they can get to the end result.
absolutely. Yeah. If it's relevant, something they care about. That's why we keep space in our curriculum for the emergent curriculum. It might be a project, it often is a project that we haven't thought of beforehand, but it comes through that conversation, through asking questions with our learners and finding out, what are they passionate about? What would they like to see on our campus or in our community? What kind of difference do they want to make? And then we start planning from there. And it's amazing what can happen when we leave some space for the learners to bring their ideas and bring their inspirations into the learning. And guess what? It really works that way. You don't have to worry about buy-in because they are already driving that, driving the learning because they care about it.
Yeah, they don't even know they're learning. They wouldn't even say, "Oh, I'm learning right now." They'd say, "No, I'm
Right.
creating, I'm doing, I'm playing, I'm having fun," and then they're learning anyway. And that's like, I think, the most magical moments. It's certainly the things I really learned in school were the things I did, the plays we put on, the
Right.
clubs I started, the projects I got involved in the community, the comic book I made with a friend, the backpacks I made out of duct tape in class because I was so bored. I'm making stuff out of duct tape. Like those were and then there's, like you said, there's math and there's art and there's all these things in that, but I had to do that despite the school. So how cool would it have been
Absolutely.
for teachers to be like, "Hey, here's a whole book on duct tape art. Like, do that all day if you want. Just make a business,
Absolutely.
start
What do you
selling
want
it."
to create?
Yeah, you want to sell it? How much do you cost? How much does the roll of duct tape cost? Here's the finances, So Della has had a few different businesses, and she manages the money from that, and we do the math, and she makes the signage, and she does the negotiation skills with the people, and it's like she's selling potions right now. So like, there's like, it's not actual chemistry, but someday it could actually. There's a little bit of chemistry. She puts the baking soda with the vinegar to makes it fluffy, and
Yeah.
but like certainly food coloring and whatnot. But yeah, it's such a fun way to learn.
Yeah, we've had a lot of slime businesses. We do an entrepreneurial unit for a whole half of one of our semesters, and it ends in a big market day, and all those businesses are showcased. And yeah, we've had lots of slime businesses, so lots of young young
Yeah,
chemists in
chemistry.
that regard.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's always so fun to see what they come up with. And, the younger ones are working on a class business, and they get to decide, do you want to get involved with the marketing, with the brand design and, help create our logo and our signage? Do you want to be on the accounting team and help manage the money, figure out how much, just like Della was doing, how much are we spending on these materials, and how much should we charge? How much do we expect to make? So there's so much learning that comes through in that. And then the mentors do a great job of then helping to reflect after, during they're supporting and they're asking guiding questions. And then after asking those reflective questions, and the learners start to see like, holy cow, I learned so much through this project and through this business, but also I'm learning about myself. Maybe in our class businesses, they take turns. So they get to experience being in the accounting team, being in the marketing and design team, um, and being in sales, all these different aspects of entrepreneurship. But they're learning about themselves and finding where they feel more passion, or maybe where they might want to grow more as a young entrepreneur.
Let's talk about grades.
Mm,
What do you think the purpose of grades is, and why don't you guys use them? What do you do instead?
yeah. Why don't we use grades? I would say because learning is not a competition. It's a lifelong journey. And grades tend to shrink that journey down to numbers and comparisons. We focus on growth, reflection, and mastery, not just performance. So, we find that what we do is what we call seasonal reviews. And in that, we give a narrative assessment that covers social emotional learning. It covers, how they're doing with, reflection and how you're doing with your friends. And by the way, these seasonal reviews are not addressed to the parents reporting on their performance at school. It's addressed to the learner, from the mentor to the learner. So it'll say, if this was for Della, it'd say, Della, I really see how much you care for your friends and how you take time to check on them if someone's having a tough time. In that section, it might reflect, I noticed that you have a tough time when you feel like things aren't fair, and you're working on really using your words and working through those big feelings when things feel unfair. So we're able to give that feedback and those reflections on the social emotional level, but also cover all of those different academic subjects with narrative assessments. I mean, these seasonal reviews are, pages and pages long, reflecting on the learning and growth that has happened through the whole semester and all these different areas. So you can see you're getting I got a B in my science class. What does that tell me about what I learned? What does that reflect about ways that I can improve? I have no idea. I get nothing from that in a grade other than this is the performance stamp that I get after doing my homework and taking some quizzes and tests. So what we do is really, we have, it's like a mastery based model, so that we can really look at what is the progress and the growth that has been made in these different subject areas. We have a whole scope and sequence, or like a rubric that shows these are concepts that are typically covered in this developmental stage. These are ones that we've covered. These are ones that we're still really practicing on. And these are ones where we see competency, and we can kind of say that this is something that this child has shown competency, and they can do this. So that gives the parent so much more of direct feedback about what are they learning, where are they struggling, what's their growth edge, and and give some ideas of how I can support at home.
I know for me, it was kind of easy to get A's. Just my mind was smart enough or whatever, like worked well enough to like memorize and repeat. My memory was good, whatever. And so I just didn't try very hard. I just stopped trying. Like I knew what I could do to get the A, and like I was not motivated to try any harder after that. And then when I saw other students that no matter how hard they tried, C's and B's, were the best they could ever do. And so it was like they always felt like they were somehow less than, or like ill-motivated to keep trying because they're not going to ever get an A anyway. And I got an A easily, and I was ill-motivated to keep trying because it was just like I could just get it no matter what. And so it seems like the idea of grades is to like motivate to try harder to do a better job, but then for maybe for this very median student, like it might work a little bit, but there's so many kids it doesn't work for. Versus if I'm being compared to myself, if I know I'm going to be judged based on how hard did I try to grow myself, how much did I push myself, what are the specific areas I need to improve, I'm going to definitely, feel a lot more value from that evaluation than just this random letter is compared to what other students or even just the teacher's just opinion of me, like just our relationship. If they don't like me, they grade me harsher than others.
Right. Grades are nothing more really than extrinsic motivation, and it's one thing to see where I made mistakes and look at ways that I could have done better or ways that, things that I'm still working on a particular concept or skill. But getting this grade at the end of the term, that's this stamp on my permanent record, it's really about that extrinsic reward. And do I feel good about myself because I got the A, or do I feel down on myself because I didn't perform as well as others next to me? Um, and so if we look at extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation is something that I'm learning for the sake of learning. I want to, if I have a growth mindset, I want to get better at this because I know how it feels when I've persevered through challenges and gotten better at something. I have an intrinsic, an idea of like a felt knowing that this is going to feel good to get better at this concept or skill, and I'm going to be able to eventually share more with others. So there's an inner drive then, and that is something that's actually sustainable, that like will stick with us and support us as lifelong inspired learners.
Hmm. So then how does the transcript work if they were, if a family wanted to maybe get their kid into a fancy private high school or something, and they would want to look at the performance of the undergrades? Obviously colleges never look at elementary and middle school transcripts, so it's irrelevant for that. But like maybe lower level stuff, like how have whole lifers gone into those situations? Does the transcript that's super thick of all the written evaluations, does that work? Did they like it better or worse?
Oh yeah, we get records requests all the time from registrars at different schools, whether they're transferring to a different elementary school, middle school, or high school. Um, high schools high schools generally aren't asking for those from the eighth graders. They have their own entrance exams and their own ways of evaluating as they go in. So it's usually more in transferring over to another elementary school or middle school. And I don't know exactly what other schools think when they rather than receiving a report card with A's and B's, they end up with this multi-page document with all sorts of detailed narrative assessment and detailed mastery-based evaluation around all the different things that they've learned and worked on and created, all the different projects that they've been a part of.
So cool.
I can't say what they think about it, but if they actually care about knowing who this child is and what their strengths and challenges are and what their passions are, then we're really giving them something to work on. I have a feeling that it's more just paperwork for some of those school offices,
Yeah.
but if it gets in the hands of their teacher, of their next teacher, and their next teacher really cares, then I know that those seasonal reviews are really going to support them in understanding who this child is that they're getting the privilege of working with.
Yeah, they're a lot better equipped with that information than just a bunch of letters in a.
Oh, they got a C in English.
Yeah, or if
Okay.
an interview is a portion of the acceptance process, they're going to rock that interview. A self-actualized kid, is going to show up in an interview so much better than not. And I went to Evergreen State College that also doesn't have grades. So I didn't get grades even in college. It was all written professor and self-evaluation. So every class had 2 pages of self-evaluation and professor evaluation. So my transcript is very thick. And most, if there was employers or grad schools that really were interested in it, I had one grad school ask for a written confirmation that this qualified as their minimum GPA requirement. And the Evergreen administration looked through it and were happy to say yes. Like based off the quality of these reviews, I'd say yes, he meets your minimum standard. So it's like that. It's like they say they have standards, but like in the end, they liked having the information better than.
Right. They just kind of had to translate it for their system.
Yeah.
So is this, this means
Yeah.
good? Yes. Like A? Okay.
Yeah.
This is
And so I think this kind of transitions into academics. A lot of talk of
Mhm.
academics, and sometimes I think whole life is maybe parents are concerned that there's not enough focus on academics. Like you said, they were doing these cool projects, and there's a lot of time spent on emotions. So, what role do academics play in your school? What is the purpose of academics? Like, why do parents care about this, and how do you address that need?
Yeah. So, what is our focus on academics? I think sometimes there's the impression that we don't focus as much on academics. We do. Um, and I think we have a really strong academic program, but we see academics as one branch of the tree, not the whole tree. When kids feel safe, when they feel curious and connected, and academic learning is going to flourish naturally. Real growth is rooted in that social emotional development. And so again, that's the foundation, and where we can develop that confidence, that tenacity, that growth mindset, and that sets us up for strong intellectual growth, to really thrive in those academics as well. So it's just um different levels of priority, but the academics are important as well, and we find that with a strong social emotional foundation, they come naturally.
Hmm. There's a lot of
we,
freedom.
there's a lot of freedom, and here's
Right?
the
The
thing:
kids don't
we
have
don't
to do yeah, there's a lot of they can object, they can like Della can like opt out of an activity. She can color instead of do the activity. They can play quietly. So there's a lot of freedom there, which I love for her because like I want her to be self-motivated. If she's participating, I want her to be all the way in. But for a lot of parents, they might think if they're not forced to learn how to read, for example, that they'll never learn it or they'll be behind.
Right. It's not about coercion, right? Because do any of us like being, bossed around and told what to do? And is that really going to prime my brain for learning? Or am I going to be in that kind of stressed, cortisol brain that is not, if I'm feeling forced and coerced into uh, some lesson. So we listen, we meet kids where they are. It's also, that means not expecting every child to be at the exact same place because because they're the same age. We don't expect them to be everyone at the same place in every different subject. Another great Einstein quote, every, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, well, then it's going to grow up thinking it's stupid. So we really want to see each learner in their unique learning style and their different intelligences and how those are coming forward. And then by meeting them where they are, and also by having the team teaching where we can break out and work with kids in different ways, and we can find ways to make the lessons fun and bring those to life, then they're able to feel challenged. And it's important to have a good relationship with taking on challenge. That's something that's in our culture. It's not, if someone is avoiding a lesson, a particular subject, something like that, because they don't like making mistakes, because they don't like the feeling of not being good at something, well, that's an opportunity to have a conversation about how that's about a growth mindset kind of conversation, like and I think, again, by modeling that, going back to the archery story, like, oh yeah, I really like being good at things too, and I don't like the feeling of not being good at something. However, I know that if we work on this and if we practice just this little step, that we're going to see progress, you're going to get better, and you're going to be amazed at what you can do here. So that relationship with challenge, with leaning into our growth edge, is really important. But again, not through coercion. It's through finding that intrinsic motivation.
Mhm.
How can I connect this to something that's going to help them understand that we're not just doing this to memorize it for some test later. We're doing this to really support you and your growth, and, take a little time right now. But I am going to challenge you to come back to this. Now, it's important to feel challenged, but also not underwater, not completely overwhelmed. It doesn't help anyone to have, to be giving a lesson to the whole group, and for a portion of that group to just be completely glazed over and lost on the topic. Again, that's where our team teaching and really getting some one-on-one time with every learner to find out where they are and how can I make sure that you're at your growth edge. You're feeling challenged, but not overwhelmed and lost.
So there's freedom and emotional safety, which are key for self-actualization, but also key to that is challenge, is like challenging yourself, knowing how to kick on a challenge. And that role of a mentor, as you described, is to challenge. My good mentors do challenge. They don't just say, oh, I accept how you are all the time. I love you and
Exactly.
accept you enough to say you can do better than this. There's another level. You're good here. You need to go to that next step, which is a very individualized approach.
Exactly. And it's not just because I said so, but it's because you're cared for and I want to support your growth. And growth doesn't happen in the comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
A
it's
lot of schools use the word rigor in
sure.
this term, academic rigor. It's rigorous. We're putting you through a gauntlet to like make you show up better. So what do you think about rigor, academic rigor? How do you guys think of that?
Yeah, I think that challenge is important and getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is important. That is that leaning out of the comfort zone into the growth edge. Those things are really important, but it's not rigor just for the sake of rigor. It's not like academic rigor for the sake of performance and competition, because that goes right back to that extrinsic motivation. And if I'm just doing this, and I don't have an internal engine for, and connection for why I'm learning this, if I don't care about the subject and I'm just doing it for the grade, well, that's not going to stick with me. And I'm not going to carry that beyond my life outside of schoolwork. So that's not really setting our children up for success in their lives or for that self-actualization, to really care about what they're working on, what they're creating, and to have the inner motivation to keep developing in that way.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with rigor in the sense of hard work and challenge, but where is it coming from? What's it for? And again, it's not about just performance and competition. It's about really growing as a lifelong learner, a passionate learner, someone who's invested in my own growth and connected to the purpose of why I'm doing it. That I can do something with this. I can share this with my community. I can make an impact.
Mm-hmm.
That makes it relevant. It sticks with the learner, and they can learn from that and really bring that out into the rest of their lives.
Yeah, there's moments that I have seen Della engage herself in rigor, preparing her performance for the spring showcase.
Oh, yeah.
She was writing that story, practicing the story, making the costume, thinking about it, tweaking it, doing it. And then there's moments like the cat passing story, where it's like, I wouldn't call asking that kid or the class to be with that person and their grief as rigor, but it is definitely challenging. Like it would be easier just paint over that and let's just pretend it didn't happen and go on with our day. It's actually harder on some level to say, no, we're going to be with this grief and we're going to sit here. And when Dill has to do peace talks, which we'll talk about in a minute, where she's upset with somebody, she feels like she was wronged, but now she has to go and tell them her feelings and what she wants. And that's really uncomfortable for her. So it's not like her life is a completely comfortable place. She's challenged every day, but it is a safe place. She feels safe to be uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah. I like to dispel the notion that just because we have this holistic model of education that we're some sort of educational utopia where everyone holds hands and skips everywhere. We are humans in a community.
Or the opposite, that it's Lord of the Flies, permissive, kids do whatever they want.
Right. Do what you want.
Anything. They're just playing all day, right? That's the sort of the opposite extreme of those two things. And it's really neither.
Correct. Absolutely. It is relationship-based real learning and real just support of human development and growth in community.
Reading. How do you teach reading? What's the science behind your approach to reading?
Yeah, so literacy is obviously such a crucial component, and we see the first years of elementary school, that in like the K1 group that we have, where there's a focus. There's certainly a focus and a prioritization on learning to read, and then when we then are getting into those rest of those elementary years, then it's more reading to learn, right? And so there's a shift somewhere around there in the lower elementary from learning to read and reading to learn. And we take a whole language approach that is not just focused on phonics, but we're learning phonics in tandem with whole language acquisition. So that's learning sight words and just learning the patterns of language, right? So when we're looking at it that way, but we're also looking at decoding, the way that these different consonant blends work and the way they work with these different vowels and short vowel sounds and long vowel sounds. It's a lot of decoding, and there's a lot to learn in that takes practice. We do weave in insights from Montessori and from Waldorf education at Whole Life Learning Center. So one wonderful thing that I love that you'll see in Della's class in the K1 group is a Waldorf inspiration of bringing in literacy. It's all introduced through the arts and through storytelling. So when they're going through their different letters and talking about the different types, different letter sounds, I see this beautiful chalk art on the board of mountains. And you have these two pointy peaks, and they're colored in like purple mountains and some snow caps on there. And the mentor in that class is telling this beautiful story about so we'll say Michael the mountaineer, and how he's climbing the mountain, and maybe so as it goes on, you're practicing all these M sounds, and through the story, that it really is reaching the inner spirit of the child, right? Through their senses, through the sensibilities of the arts, that are coming through. They have this relationship. It's not just an abstract symbol of this is M, this is uppercase, and this is lowercase. They're getting this whole story with all these wonderful M sounds. And then you can see in the mountains that, oh, it's an M, and I can practice these kind of zigzag shapes, and I get to work on my M. And that is, it's giving it a place to anchor, right?
A lot of
with the
parents
story,
worry.
the
Yeah.
sound, the songs, and the art.
Yeah, there's a lot of worry about our kids learning to read soon enough. The public school system, expects a certain amount of learning by age 6, by age 7. And it does seem that whole life students seem to learn a little bit later than that compared to the public school system. So what is the approach of timing and an age range, developmental level, and at what point is reading kind of should be expected to be proficient?
Yeah, so there is, and this is where there's some difference in the Montessori and the Waldorf approach. In Waldorf, there is more of a delayed academic approach, and the idea behind that is that, and it's really not about exactly what age, but it's about the order of operations, and that we are first learning in that first developmental stage, which is from birth till around 7 or 8. We're really learning in the concrete mode, that is through our senses, with our hands. It's why, the young ones, everything's going in their mouth, and they're just putting their hands into the sandbox and into the mud. And it's like, they're feeling out exploring the world, right? Through their textured sensory environment, and just taking it all in. So we start there. So if, like in math, Mortensen blocks are great. You can hold up one cube, and you've got 1, and then you've got a 10 stick, and you can start to get this idea. This is 1 compared to 10. And then you can see 100 stick, and you got 10 rows of 10, and you can see what 100 looks like compared to 1, and put that cube on top, and that's 101. Then you can see 1,000 cube, and there you've got 10 rows and 10 columns of 10 all cubed together. And so I can see that, I can feel that. There's different colors associated with that. This is used in the Montessori materials, and so I'm really getting, that's where there is overlap in these philosophies. I'm bringing that in right through my sensory experience, or the young child is. And then when those concepts, those concrete concepts, have an understanding, then they can be grounded in the symbolism of a one with and a one with a zero after it, and a one with 2 zeros after it. That doesn't make much sense to someone. It doesn't make any sense to someone who hasn't developed the concrete understanding of numeracy and how a one relates to 100. So you can teach them about, show them percentages all day, but there's not a concrete understanding. So it's the same thing with literacy. We are exploring language through the sensory environment. That's developing those early academics through story, through song, and through art. And then one of the things we'll bring in preschool is the sandpaper letters. So we're tracing with sandpaper. So I'm really feeling that texture, and I'm exploring in that way. We can bring it in through the art, and I'm just practicing making zigzags with my marker. And then I'm practicing making swirls. And it's not just sitting down to write copy abstract concepts, but really just kind of artistically exploring and feeling what that feels like. And then, there's a connection when I want to learn to write my name, when I want to, start to associate. I already have this story of Michael the Mountaineer, and now I can start to associate this symbol with so it's not about exactly a certain age, but I think that developmental shift around 7 or 8 is a great time to really start bringing in the abstract concepts, as long as that concrete foundation is there.
I know there's a lot of data that kids are reading at grade level by a certain age, no matter when they start. Like that, it's
absolutely
when they learn it is completely irrelevant. They will learn it eventually and catch up really, really quickly. But like, I learned to hate reading.
Mm-hmm.
And I still struggle with reading. Not that I don't know how, but just that I don't like it. And I just have this like nervous system wiring that reading is work, is boring, is hard, is something I don't like. And I think that came from being forced to try to understand these symbols before my brain was ready. So if we don't teach them to read, they're going to learn anyway. But if we try to teach them too hard to read, they might learn to hate reading, which is like so tragic.
And I think that's especially true for boys. They tend to be even more in their bodies and have a slightly longer developmental phase of that first really physical, body being phase. And to really force on the abstraction and then that, like you said, like the nervous system can really take that on and take on the story that this is hard, this is not fun, I am dumb when I'm in this area, and that can be really detrimental to self-image and that learning journey. And so we just have to understand that, again, standardization is great for automobiles. It is not meant for humans. So we have kids who are kindergarten age, 5, 6, in that same class, who are easily reading at a 3rd grade level. I remember walking through last year, and I was wearing a shirt that said Phoenix. And if you think about like if you were to try to sound that out phonetically or something like that, the word Phoenix. But I walked through, and a 5-year-old was like, "Mr. Michael, what's the Phoenix competition?" And I'm like, Did you just read that? Okay. So we easily have, kids at that age reading at well advanced levels. We also have young ones who are older, who are still really working towards that breakthrough in literacy. And we're not shaming them, and we're not making them feel like they are behind, because they're not ahead or behind. They're not in a race with each other. They're right where they are. And that's our job as parents and mentors, to meet them there, to support them. We want to challenge them in their growth. We need to. That's our job. But not to the point, not because they're behind their peers in a certain academic aptitude or in their literacy, because we care about them and we're here to just support them to take on these skills.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that every brain is unique, and that includes potential diagnoses of dyslexia, and the way that their brain is taking in the information of all of these various symbols, and how their brain is processing those. So we really have to look at those, and sometimes team up with outside support and expertise to find the best strategies to work with different learners.
Great. How about homework? What's the data, the science around homework? How do you guys approach homework? I know Della doesn't get homework today, and I'm glad of that. I know parents fight. I see so many families fight over homework and getting their kids to do the homework. And it just seems like such a waste of the parent-child relationship to be focusing on worksheets. So what do you guys do?
Yeah, homework is not necessarily shown to improve academic achievement. Of course, there is progress that can be made if on memorizing certain things, if I'm going home and going having to do all these things, but what's at what price? Is that going to be creating a lot of strife and struggle in the household? And is that child is their relationship with math in general suffering because they just hate this, having to use their home time for these things? So we will send things home to work on, especially as we get towards the upper elementary. That will look like things like, I'm working on a book report. But it's not about the product as much as it is about choosing a book that you're inspired to read and finding a creative way to share about that book with your classmates. So really, that's the point, is what we have to think about. If there's an assignment that I'm giving, what is the bigger point of it? So in that case, the point is to support developing a love of reading, and develop these kind of like critical thinking skills to think about the characters and the plot line and how and why that unfolded that way, and what were some of the lessons learned, and how can I share with others about that. So there's all sorts of skills that come through, and ways that can be done in a stress-free way at home, having a 15 minutes of quiet reading before we're going to allow a little bit of screen time or something like that, and that's something that has been in my household with two sons, 8 and 10, has really been struggle-free. I find that my son, who he's in the next age classroom up from Della, is often the one reminding me that, hey, Dad, I've got my homework to do. I want to do this, and he's motivated because he wants to. He knows he's making progress in these areas, and he wants to do that. He wants to get that home practice in. That's how we look at it. We call it home life learning or home practice. So it's not about, is it going to affect your grade? But it's just a way you can get a little bit more practice in before we come back at it. It's usually around, for him, those spelling words, and
It's like an opportunity to learn more at home. Here's our recommendation of how to do it. If they don't want to do it, they refuse to do it, they don't want to do it, there's not a test they're going to fail. There's
Right.
not a grade that they're going to get that's going to, shame them.
Correct.
Mr. Adam told me, he's the middle school teacher, told me he's like, with the kids who go to other schools, they say it's like, at another school, if I don't do my homework, I just get a and get a bad grade, and I don't really care. I'm just not really motivated. But here, if I don't do my homework, I have to have a conversation with Mr. Adam about what's going on and what's happening for you, and what would you like differently, and why? What it's that mentor. Like, are
Where's the
you really
resistance?
challenging yourself? Like, are you really showing up? Like, why wouldn't you do it? And so it's like it's actually more uncomfortable at whole life to not do your homework because there's not a grade. You have to like face the fact that you maybe shortchange yourself. Or if you want to
Right.
negotiate and say, this isn't my style, I want to do something else, then he's like, sure, let's change it. Let's do it something that works for you better. But it's not that one size fits all. So
Exactly.
how do, let's talk about punishment. This idea of like behavior management without punishment. Most schools they could not imagine a system where they didn't have detention and sticker charts and sending the principal's office and scolding and these kinds of behavior control methods. You guys don't do any of that. Why not? And what do you do instead to make sure there's order?
No, yeah, I don't have a stack of detention slips on my desk, or our head of school doesn't have that. So how does it work for there to be no punishment? Well, when relationships are strong and values are clear, kids don't need fear to guide them. They need understanding. We teach emotional literacy, responsibility, and repair. So accountability comes through connection, not control. So if there's a problem, if there's a conflict or something like that, you're not in trouble. It's just that we may have some repair to do. We may need to talk about this and come up with some solutions. So we use a nonviolent communication model to help learners talk about conflicts that come up. And we use like a framework of restorative justice. So it's not about punishment, it's about repair. That means it's if you've hurt if someone has been hurt, has been injured by your words or by your actions, then there's a responsibility within that. There's a responsibility to check on them, to try to have an understanding of the impact that your actions or words may have had, and what can we do to make that better? And how can we learn from this and go forward? And giving a child the opportunity to express their needs and make requests, and to really be heard and seen in that process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if self-actualization is the goal, to me, shame is the enemy. The shame is you're bad, you're wrong, I'm bad, I'm wrong.
Right.
And to me, punishment is like exceedingly good at having a person feel like they were wrong, they were bad. That I'm now enduring suffering that I deserve because I'm bad or wrong. And so like that does not seem to feed self-actualization. It doesn't even work very well for behavior management because a rebellion, we just want to rebel. And
No.
like I was punished a million times. It didn't change my behavior whatsoever. I was autistic. So I was actually incapable of doing the things they wanted. And yet I was continued to be punished again and again. All it did was leave me self-hating and feeling broken, and something was wrong with me that years of therapy have had to deal with. So like, that's what I always look for systems for what role, I tell parents, if there's one thing you do, try not to ever have, shame your kid. And
Yeah.
for schools, when I look at schools, like if there's one thing a school I would hope never does is shame them. And to me, that's the key thing of punishment is shaming versus your model is like, hey, there's injury, there's disruption, there's feelings about this, there's disconnection. We assume you weren't trying to do it on purpose. And if we talk about it and you see the impact, we believe that you're going to change intrinsically, and they do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the whole thing of assigning a punishment is assigning the shame and the blame. Like what rule did they break and what should the punishment be is the punitive system. And so in a restorative system, it's really thinking about, we have agreements that we make. And those are agreements that have been developed with the whole life learners and with, our community together, not just rules that have been passed down from the administration. And I'll often talk about our community like a beautiful tapestry. And it's got a loom that, has some wires going through. And that's kind of like our agreements that helps hold things together. We talk about, well, what do we need in order to work and play well together? How can we really take care of each other in this community? And then all of the different diverse strands and colors are the threads that weave through that loom are, all the individuality of our community members. But when we've hurt someone, usually, and there's like usually a broken agreement within that, um, it's not about the rule itself, it's about the impact. And that creates this tear, this tangle in our community tapestry. And that creates responsibility to repair that. And, at first that can be difficult for someone to get. But if we go back to that shame and blame punitive model, how does that work out for the relationship there? Someone's getting in trouble for picking on someone, let's say, and then that gets reported somehow, and then this person is in trouble. Who are they going to blame? Right? They're going to blame that kid again. And pretty soon the system is creating bullies. Right? That's not repairing. It doesn't repair that relationship. It makes it worse and it aggravates it. And that child or someone else who reported the behavior is going to get it 10 times worse. And it's going to continue that cycle. Whereas when we take the time to really get the impact of behavior and then see like, okay, we can actually have repair and grow through this. We're teaching kids how to navigate the complexities of a diverse world and learning how to, work out our differences and talk through conflict. And often when they've done those things a few times and they've been modeled and supported, they start to pick up on that themselves. They don't necessarily want to go have a peace talk with a mentor off to the side, but they have onboarded the skills to say, hey, like when you just, you took that ball from me there, but I was still playing with it. And I felt kind of, I feel frustrated with that. Can you not do that? All of a sudden, they're empowered to advocate for themselves, but to communicate effectively, maybe not just throw a fit, but make a request, and start to onboard those really essential human skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you're building mentor-mentee relationship, I would never have a mentor that punished me, right? That like caused me suffering because I didn't do something they wanted, right? Like that's not what they're there for. And same with parents and children. Just the relationship break is so expensive. Most of motivation is going to come because you feel connected, and if you create disconnection, it's just going to show up later. And now the punishment just has to get worse and worse. The bribe has to get better and better,
Right.
and like versus the relationship, if you appeal to it, they are very natural. So it takes longer. It's harder to do, but like is the future. And there's a lot of good data on this too, of actually what's effective. Doesn't just feel good, but it actually works better at
It actually works.
creating more order and more, even if compliance is your goal, you're more likely to get compliance because you tell them it's important to you and they care about you. Just like you can't, if you don't want to punish our spouses or our coworkers, like,
How's that going to work out?
yeah, I know, right? We've all tried it probably. And it does not work out well. So how do parents shift their mindset? Parents that are coming from a traditional school, whether their kids in one or whether they grew up in them like most of us did, what kind of mindset do they need to change to have their kid in a school like whole life?
Yeah. So why is it important for parents to rewire their own mindsets for their kids to thrive in a non-traditional model? I think it's because we've all been conditioned by a system built on compliance. So rewiring in the sense means really remembering the humanity of relationship-based learning, and that kids don't need managing, they need mentoring. So really giving your child a place where they can thrive, where they are seen and supported as the unique individual that they are, that it's shifting that priority from performance to real human development towards that self-actualization.
Yeah, is she happy? Does she want to go? Does she like going? Like to me, that's most parents don't think my kid should like going to school. Like it's just for granted that kids hate school and they're going to fight going to school, but
Yeah.
like that's to me like the most important thing is does she come home happy? Is she eager to go in the morning? Like, how much easier is it for as a parent to have a school that my kid wants to go to and then comes home happy from?
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Why
Even if it's
shouldn't
my
that be the
own
case?
happiness at stake there, but for her, that to me, that's all she needs. I just trust that she's getting what she needs to learn and grow. And sometimes I don't even know what she does all day, but I know how she feels because I can feel her. And that's to me the most important thing.
Absolutely.
How do parents think about what school for their kids? If they're ready to start school, what's the process they should go to figure out what kind of school is good for their kid?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, going there, right? And when you go into the space, so choosing a school for your child is a huge decision. It needs to be considered with a lot of intention. So going to visit and seeing how your child feels in the space. Now, there are some schools that don't, children aren't welcome for like the open house visit. Personally, at the Whole Life Learning Center, we're like, please, yes, bring your kids. We want to meet them. We want them to, come experience our space. So that's really important. But see, do they feel relaxed? Do they light up in the space? What kind of does the educator or the director giving the tour take time to really see them? Are they engaged in the space, whether that's out like on the playground, or is there green spaces for them to move in, or in with some of the classroom materials, looking at the space? Do they feel comfortable if they do a visit day? Do they feel welcome, and comfortable? I think those are all real important. Does it seem to spark curiosity? Um, so a school should really feel like fertile soil, not a factory floor. I think all parents would agree these days that we want a place for them to grow, and that's
Yeah,
crucial.
so regardless of their philosophy, whether they're a public school, whether it's some version of private school, alternative school, you describe the vibe that you would want it to
Hmm.
have, which is like, I really like that. Um, and if they're trying to say, is this holistic or not? What are some kind of key questions they could ask to kind of see, are they traditional model, churning kids out and they're just a fancier version of that? Or are they truly holistic?
Yeah, questions to parents can ask if they want to feel out if a school is a holistic or transformative model. I would ask, how do you define success? Um, how do you handle making mistakes or big feelings? Get an idea for that kind of conflict resolution, or how do you handle discipline? is a way to ask that question. Um, how do you support creativity and autonomy? Yeah, I think the answers there will tell you a lot about the school's educational philosophy.
Yeah, that's great. I was always screening for shame.
Hmm.
Is there any hint of shame ever? I don't ask that way. Do you shame kids? Because they're like, no. But, I'm just looking for that. Like, how do you approach, conflict between two kids? How do you approach behavior? How do you, like, if it was anything other than we have a conversation about their feeling, like I even asked them straight up, do you have any kind of punishment? Do you do
Yeah, punitive disciplinary measures, right?
anything punitive at all? I was sort of like out. They were out. Grades for me were like out. It's like I started from no punishment, no grades, and then as much freedom as I felt like. Then at that point, it's just the freedom continuum. Like, are they as
Yeah.
wild and free as some, like what you'd call a free school or the Sudbury model, where there's literally zero structure, no classes, no teachers, just kids and adults doing their own thing all day, all the way to, a highly structured. I feel like Whole Life's a really nice balance of structure, but that's kind of what I was looking for. But I like the way you look at it, around the vibe and their what motivates them.
Yeah, I think that, one last piece, I would, for my own child, if I'm finding a school for them, I want a place where there's love. I want a place where there's warmth,
Mm.
right? And that I know that they're going to be cared for and seen. and that makes all the difference.
Great. Any cool resources to recommend, books or podcasts or, blogs or whatever? There are still blogs.
Yeah, when I was first just really sinking my teeth into the education revolution movement and learning about holistic education, it was Dr. Ron Miller that I learned a lot from, and I actually got to study with him at educational conference as well, and really soak up a lot of his theories. But he's got this really small, digestible book called The Self-Organizing Revolution. And in that book, it really shows how a lot of times alternative education gets dumped into one bucket, that there's traditional education and there's alternative education. And this book, The Self-Organizing Revolution, actually talks about like 7 different strands of alternatives in education, and how they're different, where they overlap, and how holistic education can really pull from all of those different strands, depending on the model.
Great.
I've got one more.
Go
Also,
ahead.
this is Jack Miller. Goes by John P. Miller as his author name. Teaches at the University of Toronto, and their Department of Holistic Education. He's also been a mentor of mine, someone I've got to work with at conferences, and have invited him to work with our whole team at the Whole Life Learning Center. And so John P. Miller has written the book, The Holistic Curriculum, and has many more. Whole Child Education is another one, and those are things that have definitely inspired me as an educator and inspired our model at Whole Life Learning Center.
Great. And if you're super nerdy, my favorite source book is Pedagogy of the Oppressed. It's one of the original texts on liberatory versus oppressive education, and set the tone for the modern kind of alternative free education movement. So if you want to go back to the OG source material, it's very, very heady, like it's very academic, but it's, if you like that.
It's thick, right?
Yeah,
And written in 1970, I think, Paulo Freire.
Paulo Freire,
but
really, powerful stuff.
It is critical pedagogy, right? And it's about education for transforming our societies, and it's crucial work.
And if you're worried about the state of the world, how our kids are gonna inherit the world, and the injustice and the environmental challenges and the instability, to me, the school system is one of the key things that is potentially perpetuating that injustice, and that we can create systems that do the opposite, that prepare our kids for an ever-changing, abundant world. And that's what I feel like you're doing at Whole Life, a self-actualized society.
That's right. Exactly.
Self-actualized children and teachers and parents.
Yeah. And, Joe, I've heard you describe yourself as a children's liberation activist. And
Yes.
I love that. I can identify with you in that. And I think that pedagogy of the oppressed it really recognizes that education, or let's say like a transformative type of education, is activism. Right. This is about a human freedom movement, and embracing, throwing off the shackles of oppression, and really embracing educational models that help to set us free, that really liberate us as human beings and support us in our own self-actualization.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to say as well that that's not an end goal. I don't get to this point where like, I finished this project and I launched this business and I wrote this book and check, I'm self-actualized. But we really get to know ourselves as lifelong learners in that sense, and that self-actualization as an unfolding process that is really unending, because there's always more to discover, there's always more to create, and there's always more to learn about myself and the world. So embracing myself as a lifelong learner, and having learning come alive, right, with joy and wonder, it really makes that process sacred in a way, and it lights us up, and I think that unending process is that self-actualization.
Yeah, ultimately, I think that's when people ask me what being dedicated is all about. For me, this is embracing fatherhood as a tool for self-actualization, that our children are a pathway to us growing and becoming better. And so ultimately, yes, that's for me to do for myself, for them to do how schools do it, how we do it in workplaces. That's it.
Absolutely. I can say without hesitation that my children have been my best teachers because they have shown me so much about myself and, humbly the ways that I can grow.
Yeah, that's great. Well, this is so awesome. Appreciate your wealth of knowledge here. Such a privilege to have my daughter have a school like you've created and how much thought and attention you put into it. I see why it's been so successful, why it's going to continue to succeed. I want to end with your everyday song. You don't have to sing it. You didn't bring your ukulele, but there's this song, the theme song of the school based on this Buddhist. There's a Buddha quote, but I think it's
The
from
Dalai Lama spoke
Dalai
this
Lama.
prayer.
Yes, Dalai
Yeah.
Lama quote, and there's a song. We'll play the song at the end, but give us the lyrics.
Every day, think as you wake up. Today, I am fortunate to have woken up. I am alive. I have a precious human life, and I'm not going to waste it.
The mantra of the self-actualized. It's great.
That's right.
Thanks again. We'll see you around, and everybody stay dedicated.
Thank you so much, Joe.